Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's University Business web seminar, which is entitled The Effect of COVID-19 on Digital Transformation in Higher Ed, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor here today, Genzabar. Now, before we get started, I would just like to share just a few housekeeping items with you all today. For technical support, please use the chat panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen, then select on my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, and then type your message if you're having any technical issues, and I should get to you shortly. If you don't have computer speakers, or maybe if you prefer to listen privately, you can also please dial the phone number and access code that I'll be posting in the chat window in a few moments, so look out for that. We'll also be welcoming any questions you have today here with a Q&A session that will take place at the end of the presentation. To submit a question, please do so by using the Q&A panel, which you can find at the bottom right side of your screen. Then send your questions to all panelists, which is the default option. If you don't see the chat or maybe the Q&A panel as well, just please look to the right side of your screen again, and then click on the expand triangle, which is located directly in front of the panel name to make sure you have access to it. Also, really quickly, something important to know, if you would like to access the web seminar at a later time, you'd be pleased to know that everyone who registered and who is attending today will receive an email with a link to the slides and an archive recording. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to all of you our speakers today. We have our very own Kurt Isley-Durley from UB. Kurt is our research editor over here at University Business. And with Kurt, we have Jeff Elliott, who is the Director of Product Management at Genzabar. Kurt and Jeff, it's great to have you with us today. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Stephen. And thanks to Jeff for being with us. And most importantly, thank you so much to everyone in our audience who's joined us here today to discuss this important topic. It's been a pretty interesting experience doing this survey, the basis for this presentation. And we're going to dive right in to the survey results here in a moment. Also, before we get going here, just want to reiterate what Stephen said there. If you have questions, if you have comments, please send them our way at the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen there. And we'll be addressing those later on after we get through the presentation. But we welcome your thoughts. It'd be great to have an interactive discussion with you. Okay, so I'll just dive right in here and start off with some background here before we get to the survey results. So this is background about the higher ed landscape over about the last 10 years. And the first trend that we identify here is enrollment trending downward. Of course, probably not a surprise for many of you. Enrollment in higher ed saw its peak somewhere around 2011. Here's some data from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. I know some of those numbers are kind of small, but it's basically showing starting at about 2011, enrollments decreasing, and then we saw fall of 2020, a significant decline of 2.5%, which is about double what it was the previous year, basically due to COVID. So a decline of 400,000 students. So that's a devastating decline. And you'll see that play in here as one of the trends. So keep that in your mind as we move forward here. The other bit of background, you know, as our title indicates, we're talking about digital transformation here in higher ed. And so what does that mean? It can vary at the institution, but there's some commonalities. It can vary based on what type of institution and what area you're talking about. But I thought it might be helpful to put this together by defining what it isn't in opposition. So first you have digital upgrade, improving or increasing efficiency or effectiveness of what your institution is already doing. That's not what we're talking about. Digital transformation is instead using modern digital technologies to fundamentally change how the institution operates, optimizes resources, and delivers value to students. And we have a definition here from EDUCAUSE. Digital transformation is a series of deep and coordinated workforce culture and technology shifts that enable new educational and operating models and transform an institution's operations, strategic directions, and value propositions. So all that to say, basically, digital transformation involves much more than buying a new product, a new platform, duplicating what you're already doing, but adding some tech elements. We're talking about a fundamental transformation of how you operate. So Jeff, I'm sure you have thoughts on this. You work with a lot of institutions there at Jenzabar. What do you think about this definition of digital transformation?
Yeah, Kurt, and thank you everyone for having joining us and welcoming me in here. Kurt and Stephen, thank you so much. Kurt, I love this slide. I have to tell you, there's a number right down to the red coloring of digital upgrade, almost representing danger, right? Red, bad. You know, whenever we look at user experience, we go back to the most simplest things: green, good; red, bad. What we're trying to talk about today, and Kurt, you hit it right on the head, is, you know, I think in this COVID moment, right, the triage moment was everybody getting their courses online. And because if you didn't, how were you going to teach your students? And to me, that's digital upgrade, right? We used our tools to get courses up and running, get them online. Now the question is, are you willing and ready to transform? And that goes well beyond just getting all our courses online. In my example, it gets into creating an infrastructure to make sure that all of your instructors understand how to facilitate. It makes sure that all of your students understand how to absorb digitally in learning, all those different things, all the things you mentioned in it. And it has to touch workforce. It has to be something that's baked into your culture. And it starts with technology rather than applying technology to it. And I think as we go through our presentation here and we see some of the numbers and we talk a little more in depth, I think what folks will start to see is it is that willingness to transform that will drive not only surviving, but thriving in this new environment. And, you know, if you're stopping it simply upgrading what you're doing, schools will face some trials and tribulations through that. You mentioned, Kurt, I always work with folks. And one of the things I always use as kind of a playful segue is, you know, in the Chinese language, the symbol used for crisis is the same as opportunity. And I think that's probably a legend that's grown over the years. I'm not sure that's literally true, but I love the spirit of what it's saying. Yes, it is chaotic right now. Yes, schools are facing crisis, but in that is a wonderful opportunity to kind of self-assess who you are, look hard at mission, understand better who your students are. And we're going to talk about students as consumers this afternoon, and understand yourself better, so you can go through that transformative process as opposed to simply upgrading the newest system or things like that. So Kurt, I thought this was a wonderful foundation for our discussion this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And yeah, keep that in mind. We're still kind of just setting the scene. But when we talk about crisis and opportunity, I think you'll see that illustrated in the survey results. So I'll keep it moving here. Just more about the background of digital transformation. Just some examples here. As I said earlier, it could mean something a little bit different at each institution, depending on what we're talking about. But everything here from data analytics, marketing, using data and optimizing resources, breaking down silos, improving efficiency of operations, data security, online teaching and learning, as we're doing now, becoming more student focused, and overall making institutions nimbler and able to adapt to changing conditions more quickly. And I hope you get a sense of kind of a foreshadowing here, pre-COVID. This is what a lot of experts and higher ed leaders are talking about, the need to innovate and transform so that we can adapt when things change and meet the challenges of the future. So a lot of foreshadowing, but as I note here, many of these innovations have tended to occur at the most innovative leading institutions, but the field overall has been pretty slow to change. And another example here, this is from the olden days, way back in 2017, a study from Gartner Research about the top IT priorities in higher ed at that time. And you had analytics, ERP, CRM, but way down the list, cloud services and student information systems. You know, that's further down the list. And here's a quote from the lead analyst of that study. Higher ed is among the least digitized industries. Unfortunately, the average higher ed institution has a large backlog of digital enablement before it can even think about digital transformation. So again, this is way back in 2017. A lot of folks talking about the need to transform, and that includes moving systems to the cloud, enabling you to be more nimble to adapt quickly. Here's a quote. It's a little bit harsh. You may have seen this in other, I've seen it quoted elsewhere from Peter Drucker way back in 1997. Of course, this is pre-internet for the most part. Universities won't survive. Higher ed's in deep crisis. Already we're beginning to deliver more lectures and off-campus courses remotely at a fraction of the cost. Won't survive as a residential institution. Hopeless, unsuited, totally unneeded. This is a harsh quote here. Jeff, do you have thoughts on that? He might have overstated it, but it got some attention.
I think he did overstate it a little bit, Kurt. Absolutely. I think when you read the words, what you hear is higher ed is in deep trouble, and campuses will close all over the place, all that stuff. And you know, whether that's what he meant or not, what I want to take from it and what I want to share with everybody is what I believe is the spirit of what Drucker was saying and what he was onto. And by the way, Kurt, I hate the idea that 1997 is way back pre-internet. That really makes me feel old. But what it also does show is the potential evidence that was out there even then, that, you know, long before COVID, long before the internet, schools were going to have to evolve in the way they approach things. And it's even evidence to the previous slide, where I think higher ed has largely enjoyed a seller's market, if you will, for many, many, many years, right? I mean, I think back personally to my experience. You know, you graduated from high school, you went to college, that's what you did. You paid tuition, that's what you did. You didn't question it. You didn't ask if these were the right courses, all that stuff. Higher ed has had a long-standing enjoyment, if you will, of being able to kind of dictate the terms and dictate the rules. But even back in 97, there was evidence that that was not going to last. And if anyone has not been living under the rock under the past year and a half or so, obviously what we're talking about, that transformation, is very evident. Students now see themselves, Kurt, I believe, as consumers. And I think that's changed everything for us a little bit. Now it's a buyer's market. Students apply much more scrutiny to value and ROI. And, you know, why should I pay $50,000 a year when I can pay $5 and go to community college and get the same Psych 101? And what value are you bringing to me? And I think over the years, we've seen higher ed go, well, it's us. We're us. That's the benefit. And now students, consumers, are looking for a lot more in the way of explain to me why that's important to me. And this sense of student self-service is driving change and all those things. So I think Drucker was onto something, as we've stated, maybe a little harshly said, but I think the spirit is there. You know, if we don't start thinking about getting away from simply being residential institutions, and we don't find ways to transform digitally, we will continue to struggle. Absolutely.
Sure. Great. And here's just some continued background and foreshadowing, setting us up to talk about the present day and the survey. Quote from the Harvard Business Review: higher ed has significantly lagged behind other industries in moving to a more digitally driven, outcomes-focused business model. One measure of this is less than 5% of college budgets are dedicated to IT spending. It's one of the least digitized and most people-intensive economic sectors, suggesting that the opportunity for and risk of technology-driven disruption is strong. And then a quote here from a great ebook, encourage you to look it up, from our friends at Jenzabar here, entitled The Path to the Cloud: Digital Transformation is Imperative for Long-Term Survival. And by the way, this is from several years ago. Moving to the cloud helps you become agile in a dynamic, fast-changing, and unpredictable market, as well as become more engaged and responsive to students. So I hope that a lot of this sets the scene, but there's also a lot of foreshadowing here about the last year and a half that we've all experienced, the need for digital transformation and how that can help you pivot, be more nimble, and adapt to changing conditions more quickly. And I think, as we're going to find out here, the pandemic has crystallized that in a way that no one could have anticipated, I think. Jeff, do you have thoughts?
I do, and I completely agree with you, Kurt. And I do like, again, not because it's Jenzabar, but I do like the second quote there. And the words I want to focus in on, and you hit it, are agile, dynamic, in a fast-changing, unpredictable market, because that's where we are. That's where, even pre-COVID, that's where we were going. And what I often see, again, getting back to working with a lot of different schools on how to navigate this environment, one of the things that comes up most regularly in our discussions is not that they're agile and dynamic. And in fact, as you are getting or alluding to, it's just the opposite. We have institutions that are still very much making decisions biannually based upon faculty availability, different things like that. We have business models that follow that traditional higher ed ivory tower-esque, as opposed to much more dynamic and lean and things like that. So, folks, I encourage you to think about, as we go through this, how would you apply these types of things to your own thoughts about your own institution? Are you agile? Do you have that ability? Are you dynamic? Can you have an idea that becomes very important to get through and adopt as culture and practice on campus, but have to wait 5 months before the next available time to kind of hash it through? So those are words that I think you talked about foreshadowing, Kurt, and those are the ones I think folks really kind of want to pay attention to as we go.
Sure. Yeah, great. All right. So with all that said, all of that as background, kind of setting the scene here, we'll dive into our survey. Now about our survey, this is during the height of COVID-19, January 2021 rather, just a couple months ago. So we worked with Jenzabar to develop and deploy this survey, and asking higher ed leaders all over the country in the UB audience how this is impacting their institution's use of technology. And just a little about our respondents, and many of you joining us here today may have taken our survey, and if so, thank you very much. 686 total respondents, which, by the way, one of the biggest responses we've ever had for a survey. So a lot of interest. Is just a voluntary survey. We invited folks to participate if you have thoughts on the impact of COVID on your technology. And this is just some of their demographics that they self-selected, the most coming from institutions with under 5,000 enrollment, which makes sense because there are more of those. But a good diversity of institutions here, as you can see, sizes and types from all over the country. So that was great to see. And self-identifying more than 17 job titles or departments from all over campus. So diversity of respondents here. So we always love to see that diversity of perspectives. So I'm here to first kind of overarching question, asking, prior to COVID, had your institution been engaged in some level of digital transformation. And rather than just a yes or no, we had significantly, somewhat, very little, or not at all. So you have a little over a quarter saying significantly, a little over half saying somewhat, and then some saying very little, and just a couple saying not at all. Okay, that kind of sets the scene. And then a follow-up. Now, because of COVID, is your institution currently engaged in some level? And here's what they said. All of a sudden, it jumps to significantly, this huge increase to the top answer. I can show them side by side here. So you add up those two on the right, the top two, significantly and somewhat, and that's where we come up with this number, 97% of respondents saying COVID's driving some level of digital transformation at their institution. And the not at all disappears. The very little goes to 2%, a little over 2%. So this is a pretty striking number to me. We do all kinds of surveys. Very seldom do you see numbers like this, adding up to 97% of people saying it's changed how they use technology. Jeff, how did this strike you? I know you guys have this this great cartoon here.
Yeah,
Give you a second.
I mean, when you see the 97%, it's great to see, right? Because it does speak a little bit to that agility, that ability to react a little bit. I think it also speaks to how reactionary we were caught. And former athlete here, full disclosure, what my basketball coach or football coach would have said, you got caught flat-footed. And we're seeing some of that. I think in the jump of those numbers, you're seeing folks that maybe got caught a little flat-footed. Again, why this cartoon is cute, it's also very telling, is, COVID, the key word here is a catalyst, right? This is not the cause. This is what escalated the cause. The cause are many things, including dropping enrollments and changing traditional student pools and changing adult learning pools, the economy. There's a lot of reasons why enrollments were dropping and changing. COVID was the wrecking ball that came along and caught institutions flat-footed, maybe dabbling in digital change, but not really true transformation. So yeah, this is that 97% is good to see, but I also think it's a little telling, the stark change from somewhat and absolutely from prior to COVID to now. And hopefully that's a lesson we all walk away with.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you described that. So it's showing not just the impact, but this is really showing the need for change prior to COVID as well.
Yep.
So that's another way to think about it. Great. Well, I'll keep it moving here. Now, in our survey, we asked about a variety of technologies, but we thought for the purposes of this webinar, we kind of focus in on the student information system and kind of dial into the responses on that aspect. And I'll mention this again later on. We also have a cool infographic white paper coming out that we're going to be promoting, that UB is going to be sending out, that depicts a lot more of the survey results. So keep an eye out if you're a UB subscriber. Keep an eye out on your email for that. That'll be coming up shortly, very soon. And so that'll give you some more insights into the survey results. So again, we'll just focus on student information systems here. So this question asked, does your current institution currently use a modern cloud-based SIS? So we drew that delineation, you'll see in later questions. And here's what they said. So we had about half, exactly half saying yes, they did, but a good percentage, more than a quarter, saying no, and then a good chunk saying they were unsure if they are or not. And then we asked about how they would rate the quality, reliability, and effectiveness of their SIS. So we then were able to delineate between those with the modern cloud-based SIS. 68% rated it as very good or excellent. And then those without, only 29% rated it very good or excellent. So pretty stark difference there overall. And then a similar question, how confident are you that your SAS will be able to meet the changing needs of your institution and students in the future? And then we're able to delineate, once again, on the left, those with a modern cloud-based SIS. 94% of them said they were somewhat or extremely confident. And then those without, only 74%, 20% less, but then an increase, 25% saying they had low level or no confidence at all if they don't have a modern cloud-based SIS. So pretty striking differences here. Jeff, you've worked at, you're a product manager at Jenzabar, so I think you're pretty intimately aware of the differences here. Could you maybe outline some of, when we talk about a modern cloud-based SIS, how is that different from one that isn't? Could you highlight some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Kurt, when you look at the differences between the two, there's a couple of categories to look at, right? There's the technical infrastructure that really impacts, resource efficiency, both in terms of staff of IT, server setup, all that stuff. The other side of it is the impact to staff and end users. And there are a few things there that really stand out in terms of what's the difference between the two. And the first is simply the technology. A modern cloud-based system is going to be built on a much more modern framework designed for the type of traffic and usability that our staff need to use when trying to work with high volumes of students. A cloud-based system benefits from the potential for high elasticity in terms of resources. So when you're going through a really heavy registration cycle, your technology, your framework can automatically scale up with the volume of students and then automatically scale back. Those types of things are fairly static in a non-cloud-based SIS. When we talk more mainframe system or we get into client server, the other thing is the evolution of user experience in terms of engineers and designers coming in and talking to users and understanding the differences. And like you mentioned, as a product manager, one of the key facets of my role every day is talking to users, asking what problems we need to solve. And that's in a lot of ways what our UX designers do with our users, right? They're having conversations on a very regular basis. Does this usability work for you? So that cloud-based, that web-based technology allows for that much more modern user experience too, as opposed to simply having these kind of data windows laid on top of data tables, which were not overly efficient. They were usually single entity driven, meaning you looked at a student and that was it. Now we're able to position data very differently to the user, both visually and technically in terms of, data analytics and those types of things. So those are just some of the things, Kurt, that really stand out. I think what's going to drive most of it, though, is that student self-service, right? So if there was, among all those other things, and we'll get to more in a few minutes, that student self-service is really within that SIS going to drive that need for that cloud-based system.
Sure. Great. And then, this question prompts another question, basically. How can you tell if you're an institution and you're thinking about your SIS or other technologies for that matter? How do you know if, or is there a way to tell that system, whatever it is going to be able to meet the changing needs of your institution and students in the future? So, Jeff, I think you walk institutions through, we have this audit here, right? Could you talk us through this, and this can help answer that question, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And when we talk to folks about auditing their infrastructure and looking at things, there's these kind of 6 key pillars that we try to help them understand what they're looking at. And first of all, is it scalable? Like, is it a system that meets your goals? Is your system agile? Is your system able to pivot? And again, that's one of those benefits to being cloud-based is the technology, the web technology, the cloud-based technology that modern systems are built upon. Expect that type of pivot, expect that type of agility, and therefore are built for it. Whereas some of the older classic systems, they're not. They're just not. They are driven the way they are driven, and many times they are built on top of what are called rapid deployment systems, where it makes it quicker and easier to get functionality out, but it's not necessarily something that's agile and schools are able to move with. Empowering is such a key part of what we talk about, gang, empowering faculty and staff. We don't want to simply put information in front of you. We want to help you do your work. That's where that user experience comes in. That's when building functionality that solves problems. Those are such key things in terms of scalability, ease of use, empowering students. The flip side, of course, to empowering staff is empowering students. Funny story, I worked with a community college, and there's so many of them, I don't feel like I'm giving anything away, that of course, in working with them from an advising perspective, we were talking about, finding ways. They were talking about struggles they were having in terms of getting students the right advising help and more, cooperative advising, where we're talking about student goals and all that stuff. And they said, well, one of our strategies, and we think it's part of our charm, is we bring them in and we make sure every single student sees an advisor. And it just so happened to have a focus group with some of their students, of which 90% of the students said, I wish they wouldn't make me come in and see my advisor all the time. And it doesn't mean they don't want to see an advisor. It means that as a consumer, they've become digitally experienced and they want the institution to react to that too. And they want to be able to go in and audit, maybe edit their own academic path, or, change their own majors and do all this stuff. Does your system allow for that? Does it empower your students? And that's a huge piece. The next piece, of course, integrated. And that stems from not only just the data. Is your data integrated? Are your systems integrated? Is your campus integrated? And a lot of times what we see is we see an IT staff who says, Jeff, I have this question about this third-party software. And I'll say, okay, well, good thing we have some time. No, they already cut the budget. I just need to know this. And there's not a lot of conversation on campus about how we want to solve problems with tools. And sometimes schools will cut a check for a new system and they've got 90% in their existing SIS and things like that. So, we're talking about campus integration, communication, talking to each other. And then we're talking about the literal integration where, do you have a tool that kind of helps your IT folks bring all that data together in a single spot, accessible, data analytics, big data, operational day-to-day data, and having a system that does that. One of the things Jenzabar is working really hard on, we're very proud of, is our Unity platform, which is a very point and click, drag and drop way for schools to set up these types of integrations, where we have partners that integrate with Jenzabar's database. And it's so important because the analytics piece we'll talk about in a second is such an important part of our strategy. We talked already about user experience. That is one of the key benefits of being on a modern SIS, is taking advantage of that user experience. And it's not just, does it click better? It's really designed to solve your problems. Security and compliance is a huge, huge piece of this discussion. We would, I think, Kurt, be absolutely remiss if we did not talk about the importance of that in terms of everything ranging from FERPA and HIPAA to WCAG 2.0, 2.1, ADA compliance, protecting the data online. Again, the reason that the cloud-based helps so much with security and compliance is it is absolutely built with that in mind. It was not something they added on to later. It's how that technology got built, was with that type of encryption, with that type of data protection in mind. Now, is any system foolproof? No. But again, what you're taking advantage of simply by moving to a system that does that is an exponential increase in design for security and compliance protection, as opposed to how are we going to scramble and kind of make it work that way when we talk older technology. Data and analytics, you know, such a huge part of transformation here. And I'm going to kind of pose it in two ways, Kurt, that I hope the audience kind of gets both of. One is being able to leverage the data in such a way now that we simply couldn't in the past. A lot of times our systems were disparate. Moving data from one system into another was almost impossible, very difficult to do with some of the older tools that allowed for it. And now we're able to very quickly and very easily get big data into and out in front of key decision makers, and users, again, whether it's that kind of big operational day-to-day or big forecasting data in terms of modeling. And the other way, folks, it's so important is not only does the technology allow for it more efficiently now, it's really something that you need to be taking advantage of to drive your transformation. And earlier, I think, Kurt, we talked about getting caught a little flat-footed. And that's what leveraging model data, forecasting data will hopefully be able to help schools do. Now, will it always be able to account for COVID? Probably not. But it would have been able to account for drops in enrollment that were already coming, we were already seeing. So, you know, two things, folks. The web-based technology, the cloud native, absolutely allows us to present you with that data in a much better way, but you've got to use it. And we highly recommend you take a look at that and use that to drive some of those decisions so we are not, as we said earlier, caught as flat-footed. The last bullet here that I think is super important, and it happens to our folks a lot. It happens at other institutions. I still have friends at other institutions I talk to, where if you weren't part of the initial implementation, it's very hard to get training on how to use the system. And if folks can't get training on how to use the system, they're going to struggle. And one of the benefits in looking at when you're doing your audit is there support and training available to me? Is it a system that is more intuitive because of that user experience we talked about, where it's more intuitively solving my problem? So the training on point here, click here, right click again, you know, those days are hopefully gone in our more modern SIS. But folks, again, make sure you are budgeting. One of the things we absolutely saw in that triage moment was everybody getting their courses online. But what we also saw in talking to folks in some of the data that's out there is a lot of our folks didn't really know how to facilitate those programs, those courses. And that type of training and infrastructure and support is going to be crucial for you and your transformation in this age. So, you know, make sure your SIS provides those opportunities. Make sure you budget for and make sure you take advantage of being able to utilize that.
Sure. Yeah, pretty comprehensive audit, and I'm sure this would be helpful to a lot of institutions as they think about those things. As we've been saying, COVID has caused a lot of institutions to rethink some of these core systems. Are they really meeting our needs, and what about the future? So that's very interesting and helpful. Thank you. One other note to our audience here, just another reminder about the Q&A, bottom right-hand corner. Love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments that you have for us. We'll get to those in just a couple minutes here. But maybe you have thoughts on how COVID impacted your institution and your use of technology. maybe it's caused you to question how your core systems are meeting your needs or not. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So just type in the bottom right-hand corner there, the Q&A box, and we'll be getting to those in just a second. So kind of bringing it home here, again, we focused for this presentation just on the SIS and what folks said about the impact there. 16% of all respondents said that their institution had invested in a new SIS because of their experience during COVID-19, specifically because of that. And this is just 2 months ago, back in January. 20% of all respondents said that their institution was planning on investing, if they hadn't done it already, that they're planning on it specifically because of COVID-19. And I assume, one can assume, because they realize it's not meeting their needs and is not going to in the future. And then 22% of those without a modern cloud-based SIS said that their institution would now be investing in such a system, again, because of their experience during COVID. So kind of a lot to take in there. But Jeff, I'd ask you again, your take on this. Do these numbers surprise you? These seem low to you? Do you think they're going to increase over time as a lot of institutions are instituting this high flex remote learning environment for the foreseeable future? Do you think we'll see these numbers increase over time, or what's your take on these ones?
I do, and I do believe, Kurt, they're a little low. In fact, when I first saw these numbers for institutions on here, to use a little levity with it, I think looking at numbers this low, folks, it reminds me of the old moral: you don't have to be faster than the bear, you just have to be faster than the person next to you. If these numbers are true, and institutions are going to be looking at moving and transforming technologically in these smaller percentages, then those that are moving are going to be at a high advantage. And I think getting back to some of the things, Kurt, we laid out a number of ways folks could audit. There's all different kinds of stories that I've come across that, I had a school in particular that was days, literally 2 days away. They had set up all their whiteboards, all their cue cards. They were about to do the traditional come to the cafeteria and do room selection for fall housing. And COVID hit, they closed the school. They did online classes and all that, but they had no way and no frame of thought for how to get housing selection done. And within a month, we were able to get them up and running on student housing and successfully deployed. They increased fall enrollment by over 10%. They'd never go back. But, there's all kinds of stories like that where if you don't have these modern systems, you're not able to do that. So, yeah, I think these numbers are low. I believe, Libby had a question that I'll answer now. As a community college, high poverty rate, problem offering online and virtual courses has been a huge problem. And I think you had mentioned, Kurt, that high flex, that hybrid, we're going to offer it online. We'll offer the same exact course at the same exact time on campus and just use our COVID protections, things like that. Folks are going to find a way to figure this out. There's no doubt about it. But if I don't have that hybrid flex option, if I can't offer something online, I'm just going to have problems. I'm going to have problems getting users to my institution because we still, even with, our proximity, our close proximity to what the WHO calls herd immunity, people are still fearful, and it's still a very real fear. It's still a very real problem out there. Folks are going to want to attend online, but there are going to be students, and this is really, I think, the golden nugget tucked inside of all this transformation, Kurt, is, again, if you're not going to be able to transform, how are you going to be able to engage? How am I going to be able to replicate some of what happened much more organically outside the classroom? let alone inside the classroom. How am I going to create that sense of community? How am I going to be able to engage with individuals that I might have run into in a hallway, things like that? How am I going to be able to get some of my courses that just don't fit online well? How am I going to maybe kind of be able to make that stuff happen on campus? High level chemistry, some of our dental hygiene or nursing programs are just going to have folks on site. So, I think those numbers are low. I do think they will grow, and I'm very hopeful of that. There's a lot of great tools out there. There's a lot of great technology being utilized that, if you're not one of those folks, then you need to ask yourself, who am I running faster than? Because in that example, the bear is coming, and are you going to be able to survive that? So I do see an increase, Kurt, and I'm very hopeful for it.
Sure, absolutely. Great. And so to kind of sum up some of the findings here, despite its many challenges and negative impacts, as we all know, COVID has been an unprecedented disruptive event. It's also driven an innovation and given many colleges and universities new urgency to modernize. A couple of great quotes here. Basically, this is a silver linings slide here. The pandemic has had a transformative effect on higher ed, accelerating trends and challenges we knew were already reshaping our industry. But it's also proved that education can be much more personalized, flexible, and technology-driven than many had realized. It's from the president of Carnegie Mellon. And then this is from a recent column in UB. There are very few silver linings in this crisis, but the digital transformation of higher ed could end up being one of them. So kind of your silver lining, bright side take on the impact of COVID, especially on our use of technology in higher ed.
Yep.
And
I think, Kurt, what
sure.
also highlights is what we talked about earlier, right? So again, I know we've done this a couple times, kind of like a nice Seinfeld episode, bringing it full circle, right? That's that crisis and opportunity, guys. Yes, what a terrible thing to have to go through. It touched many of us very personally at a very personal level in terms of suffering and loss and everything. And you never want to look at something like that and belittle it or diminish what it means to everybody. But at the same time, it happened. It's a part of our day-to-day lives right now. And how are we going to grow from it, within it? And that's that opportunity. That's that silver lining that you see in both of those quotes. To stay stagnant, to simply think that the innovations that have been brought forth are going to go away are not. And if anyone thinks these issues weren't coming prior to COVID, they were. Students are much more discriminating when they look at institutions. I go back to our metaphor of it as a buyer's market now. So the students, in many cases, because of those dropping enrollments, will get to drive process more and all of that stuff. And without this moment of, as an institution, as individual offices and departments, if we don't take steps back and take a good hard look at our mission, do our policies and procedures help drive our mission and our vision? Are we able to empower students? Are we able to empower staff? Are we able to do all those things that we say we want to do, but have been caught in that trap of that's the way we've always done it, or that's where everybody's comfortable, those types of things. So once again, to pull it all right back around, Kurt, this is a very tragic reason why, but at this point, folks, it is an opportunity to really take a look at how technology can drive transformation on your campus.
Sure, absolutely. Yep. Really good take on it. Thanks so much. And we're going to get to the Q&A here. Just want to call attention to this again, as I mentioned earlier. We focus basically on one sliver of the survey results here, but we wrote up this infographic / white paper. and we're going to be promoting this coming up very soon. So keep an eye out in your email, and you can click to download this and see more of the results in there. So it's pretty interesting to see the results and what people said about the impact at their institution. Okay, another quick reminder here. If you do have a question, feel free, please, question, comment, enter it in the Q&A at the bottom right-hand corner there. Thanks for your thoughts. A bunch of interesting questions and comments here. Jeff, let's see. There's a good question here. You know, we talked about the importance of moving to the cloud and cloud-based systems, and I think you mentioned security as one aspect of that that technology audit slide there, and someone asked about that. How do you ensure cloud vendors applying security? You know, on-premise you have controls, but off-premise or cloud-based, there might be some nervousness there. Jeff, you know, from your perspective, how would you address that?
Yep, and I think, Cindy, that's a very fair question to ask. And there's terminology she uses there, Kurt, that I think is a big part of an institution's kind of deciding to move, is that on premises where our servers are on site, our networks are on, you know, everything's on site on my campus, and I have control over that, to the move to the cloud, which is generally off premise. And I think, Cindy, the answer is good old-fashioned research. One of the things that we try to tell folks all the time is, you know, kind of like when you buy something on eBay, the first things you look for are how many have they sold and at what percentage is their success rate, right? And I think that's what you've got to do with cloud vendors too. If you're looking for either an SIS or a point solution, do your research. You know, try to find out if you have other colleagues in the industry using that. You know, how does that work? You know, most of the technology is built to protect that, whereas again, a lot of the older technology is not. But at the same time, you know, yes, do your research. You know, whether or not there are specific things to kind of ensure, you know, obviously monitoring their statuses in terms of all the key acronyms that apply to data integrity, you know, make sure they are certified in those areas, things like that. But I think research of a particular vendor is the best way to do that.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Great. And just a comment here. Someone says, for future surveys, I'd be curious to find out what colleges are going to offer in the future. Will it be more hybrid classes, so that remote learning is already set, or because remote learning is already set up in place? Yeah, good question. And yeah, duly noted. The challenge there, I think, is that it's changing so quickly.
Yeah.
Your future
And I think,
plans.
you know, that's an interesting area too. The hybrid classes, like again, I think there's a number of ways. Look to different vendors, but look yourself. You know, there's many ways folks are using augmented reality, virtual reality. So I think folks are going to have to kind of really explore. I know some of that technology gets very expensive very fast, but some of it is surprisingly inexpensive, and you know, may help some of those courses. But I do think it's going to be interesting to see where folks go. Hopefully, Kurt, we're able to return back to some sense of normalcy where we're able to more comfortably offer those high flex where there is an on-site offering. But yeah, I agree with Laura. That would be a very interesting kind of question to pose.
Sure. And while we're talking about the future, actually, it's a good lead into another topic in the questions here. Some questions about, can you give some examples of engaging students or student engagement in a buyer's market? Jeff, you described higher ed as moving from this, I think you said seller's market, into a buyer's market. The bottom line being very student centered and treating students more like customers, and the importance of personalization in their experience. Do you have some examples that come to mind as we talk about that moving forward?
Absolutely, and I think that was Rich that asked that. Um, One of the things, guys, that is going to be imperative in this, if to stick with that metaphor, the buyer's market, is you absolutely have to know who your students are. And I was talking to Kurt offline earlier of, an institution that I came across at a conference, where they were stuck in a mode of understanding their students in very traditional higher ed ways: part time, full time, male, female, adult learner, traditional, non traditional, high school student, those types of buckets. And one of the things that this individual was able to kind of relay that his institution did, and he came from a product management background as well, or at least product development, was, and I'm not saying everybody has to do this, but I think it gets to the point of better understanding, is created what in product development world is called a user persona, which is going out, talking to your potential candidates, talking to your existing students, talking in large numbers, not just surveys, but talking in large numbers to alumni, and getting more to the heart of what were the problems you were faced with, and what are your roles, and what are your challenges, and all that. And long story short, what came from that is that institution's ability to understand their students in 8 new buckets, and not one of them was a traditional higher ed bucket. It was, as one of the examples was, as an urban campus, very large African American population, it just so happened that they had a very fair percentage, large number of students who were not going to pay with credit card. They were not going to pay with student loans. They were going to pursue their education when they had the money put aside to do it. And that's great, right? The problem is when you're sending out a retention letter that says, hey, Kurt, you didn't show up last semester, that's not persistence. And that's one of the markers of you being an at-risk student. No, I've got a 4.0. I'm just not paying right now this semester because I can't afford it. And what it really helped them do is much more specifically engage and target their engagements, from letters all the way down to emails and text and interaction with advisors. Some students were in multiple personas. And that's how they bettered their communication. That's how they better understood not only how to label dear student, but really get into understanding how to provide better services, how to better understand who their users were. So I think that's something I would highly recommend, Rich, to take a look at is, if it's a buyer's market and we're in real estate, the first thing I need to do is understand who my buyer is. And I think that's one of those areas where higher ed has probably gotten comfortable labeling individuals, and they don't necessarily always really represent who your students are. So that's the first step I take, is really use personas or don't, but really try to understand who your students are specifically on your campus.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, terrific observation, and all those things we talk about, personalization, becoming students centered, and really COVID kind of kicked a lot of that into high gear, I think.
Yeah.
Providing remote learning and flexibility for your students to keep learning no matter where they are. So hopefully we'll see more of that in the future as we move forward here. Well, terrific. Thanks so much to everybody who asked questions. We're just about at the top of the hour here. I don't want to take more of anyone's time here. Thank you all so much, and thanks, Jeff, for joining us here. And thanks to all of you who may have taken our survey. We really appreciate you contributing. We always love to hear from UB subscribers. So at this point, I'll just turn it back over to Stephen for some quick closing remarks here.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt, for that. And also thank you, Jeff, for your insights. Really brought a lot of perspective to our survey. And that said, I would also like to thank our attendees for joining us today. For those of you who enjoyed our presentation, there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by University Business. which is the leader of in editorial news, trends, as well as current issues in higher education. As you know, our wide range of readers, they subscribe for free to University Business, and they stay up to date with us through our print magazine, in addition to the digital edition, as well as our newsletters, which includes UB Daily, which is our daily newsletter, and UB Tech, which features the most relevant ed tech stories in higher ed, as well as web seminars like this one. Also, for those of you who would like to watch this web seminar again, or maybe some of you who believe that the solutions provided here today would be useful to your colleagues, you will be pleased to know that there will be an archive recording of this web seminar, which will be available at the URL, which you can see on your screen here. You can also expect to receive an email from our UB team here at some point tomorrow, which will include a link to all of the slides. So with that, on behalf of University Business, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks everyone, and have a great spring semester. Take care, be well, and stay safe everyone. Thank you.